aggressive and competent bungalow committee that works very, very hard to keep it new looking, and it certainly does. So if you haven't been there recently, go visit. Go on the weekend so you could say hi to the docents. And speaking of docents, we're always on the lookout for some docents to greet. It's a great way to spend a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And after your shift, you can go to Whole Foods or Rasta Tacos across the street and head down to Main Beach. It's a great way to meet new people and enjoy our beautiful downtown Laguna. So if you are interested in becoming a docent, you can certainly email us. And we have Johanna in the very back of the audience behind the donation jar, and she'll be happy to talk to you if that interests you. Speaking of donation jars, we're happy to present these programs free of charge. There is a cost, of course, which we absorb through our annual budget, but if you'd like to help defray the cost of these programs, there's a jar back there, and better yet, if you'd like to make a donation to the Historical Society, we live off our donations and our memberships, so we'd appreciate those. And if you're not a member, consider becoming one. There's a lot of advantages to it, and we have a lot of fun. And if you have an interest in donations or becoming a member, Johanna in the very back again can help you. Let's see. Our board works really, really hard. So we do have a few members of our board here. So if I could ask our board to stand quickly and wave. If you're on the board, please stand and wave. Thank you very much. If you noticed who stood, if you have any questions, comments, kudos, or critiques, please find them and let them know. Well, our program, as I'm sure you know, because you're here tonight, is on St. Francis by the Sea. I've heard it called St. Francis by the Sea American Catholic Church. I've heard it called Catholic Church. I've heard it called a cathedral. So I'm sure, hopefully, we'll hear more about all those monikers as the evening goes on. Until recently, you may know, is a record holder as the smallest cathedral in the world. It survived despite cultural changes, leadership changes. It was built in 1934 and has been on the National Register of Historic Places since 1988. And I'm sure, again, we'll hear more about all that as well. But it's a little gem in our beautiful town, and what a better way to get to know these gems by coming to these programs and listening. I am very honored to introduce our speaker tonight on that, a veteran journalist, born in Long Beach, has lived in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Manhattan, and now where else would she live but a historical district in Santa Ana. She's recently retired as an instructor in media studies at Santa Ana College and has also taught at Cal State Fullerton. She graduated with her bachelor's from San Francisco State University and also has her master's. She's a well-known writer, including for the LA Times, senior editor for Publishers Weekly, and an author of many, many books. Most recently, interestingly, a book called Aldous Huxley's Hands. This came about because our speaker found a photo of Aldous Huxley with no inkling that he was actually a friend of her father's. And the book describes that, so I believe it's for purchase or perusal, both up front here and in the back of the room. Once, when our speaker was asked what inspires her, she said, quote, "I'm mainly inspired by historical details. I like to go into delicious detail of early cultural periods," unquote. So to hear delicious details of our St. Francis by the Sea, please join me in a very, very warm Laguna Beach Historical Society welcome to our author, teacher, and journalist, Alene Simons.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me tonight, and thank you all for coming. So I have my little cheat sheets here because there are details. And rather than my being able to speak just from looking at a slide, I want to be sure that I have my ducks in a row. So we're going to take it that way.
We're being asked to speak to the mic.
Oh,
TV and all that.
is that better? Okay. As the title suggests, Navigating the Tides of Change refers to the founding of St. Francis by the Sea Cathedral and changes since its doors were opened in 1934. When you enter, it's like stepping inside a scaled-down version of a stately European cathedral. Then you look up, and you see amazing rafters and a mix of influences. Why is this? That's a question I'll explore tonight. So like many here, I have an abiding affection for St. Francis by the Sea, and especially the hand-lettered rafters with their messages and symbols, from commonplace wisdom to esoteric metaphysical principles. This feature alone, and how the words and phrases, it's amazing to me how those were designed by the founding bishop, Bishop Percy Wise Clarkson, that he designed the whole layout and then hired an artist to create the beautiful lettering in gold and black and red. Art calligraphy in Laguna Beach, where else? Well, behind this amalgam of Christianity and world religions, though it's primarily American Catholic, it can be traced back to at least two other religious organizations. I'll loosely call them denominations, since the 1930s. Though the principles of American Catholic Church differs from those of the Roman Catholic Church, primarily in that it is outside papal authority and clergy members are not required to be celibate. I'll also talk about some of the philosophical influences going on in Orange County at the time this church was built and in its heyday. Now, I don't claim to be comprehensive about this. I do hope my talk will lead to continuing research and spark an interest, a call to action, really, to create an archive for this church, perhaps a repository for digitized documents and photographs and maybe special artifacts. Some of them Jessica DiStefano has brought tonight. So I'll talk a bit about the physical church, the interior, the primary bishops or archbishops, and a little bit about its spiritual direction over the history of its existence. Beginning with the founding bishop. Let me move ahead here. The interior, of course, and the altar. Much to be said about the altar. This is the rafter area. We'll be talking about that. And this is the founding bishop, Percy Wise Clarkson, whose granddaughter Jessica is here tonight. He was succeeded, I'll point out too that in this picture, the center image is of Bishop Clarkson with his daughter. He was succeeded by Lowell Paul Wadley, whose granddaughter is here tonight as well. And he was succeeded with a couple of bishops in between. I don't have the timetable entirely worked out, though I learned a little more about it tonight from someone who's here. This is Bishop Simon Talarczyk. And the current bishop is Bishop Brian Delvaux, and he's here tonight as well. So we have kind of a full complement of the history of the church in some ways, in family members as well. So the enduring physical structure is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, thanks to the work of Anne Frank in 1988. Again, most of the unique features, or one of the most unique features, is the hand-painted rafters. Here are a few details from the book, or from the, I'll go back one step. This gives you an idea of, and I'll show you a few more images from the package, but this gives you an idea of how the application is created to create a structure that is listed on the historical register. Oop, I jumped ahead too far there. So over the years, the church has gone through subtle shifts, and these came about primarily because of the clergy members who have been associated with the church. I'll digress for a moment because you may wonder why I wanted to delve into the history of this church. I do have a long ago master's in history of religions, but it was in Chinese Buddhism, so it's not directly related to St. Francis by the Sea. My specialty was in Chan, the predecessor of Zen. So my passion for this subject began in 2001 when I found several sealed boxes behind rusty paint cans that had been lost for 50 years in the garage behind my family home in Long Beach. And what I found in the boxes amazed me. Some were labeled in my father's neat printing as the Hand, and one box was lettered the Church. Inside the first box, I found 1,000 photographs of hands. ranging from members of the LA Philharmonic Orchestra to twins, to schizophrenic patients, at 2 mental hospitals in California, and there were a number of the hands of clergy from St. Francis by the Sea. And in this study, there were also some other people related in Laguna, such as the greeter, Eiler Larson. I also have the photograph of his hand. This photograph, he's on the left, of course, is hanging in the Hotel Laguna. So the collection included the hands of my father's friend Aldous Huxley, best known for his novel Brave New World. But my father tells me that Aldous was very interested in the psychospiritual practices that went on at this church in the 1940s and 1950s. So I mentioned that one box was labeled the church. Incidentally, this is what the hand photographs look like. It was a serious study. It was replicated by the head of psychology at UCLA. These are the hands of Aldous Huxley. The box called the church contained these artifacts because my father was a priest here in the late 1940s and early 1950s under Bishop Wadley. And I had a vague recollection of going to this church, which I attended every Sunday when I was a small child. And I had a vague recollection of the hand photographs. But as I started digging into all of this, of course, this became one of those wonderful rabbit holes that a historian likes to fall into. So, in brief, this is my book, Aldous Huxley's Hands, in which I talk in a couple of chapters about the church and some of these psychospiritual practices and how they relate to other interests. And this is Jessica DeStefano's book, which is here tonight as well. Her book, The Rafters of St. Francis, which is a beautiful book and has color photographs of all the 7 rafters. So in terms of the church's history, I'll start with the reason that Greg mentioned, that St. Francis ranks as a cathedral, because it has a bishop, which is related to the concept of ex cathedra, or a pronouncement of authority from the bishop's chair. And the bishop's chair of St. Francis is one of its treasures. As most of you know, it's a small structure, only 1,008 square feet, 17 by 60 feet. For this reason, for many years, it was considered the world's smallest cathedral, until a few years ago, and that was in the Guinness Book of Records, till a couple of years ago, a church in southern Missouri was constructed and made that claim and took away the title. So I mentioned that it's listed in the National Register of Historic Places, in which Anne does an amazing job, and it's wonderful reading. It's on a PDF and very readable, of the amazing details in this church. I can't go into all of them, suffice it to say, but these are some of the black and white photographs that were used to put forth the candidacy for its listing on the National Register. This is the entranceway, for those of you who are familiar with it, with the church. This is taken, I forget which direction this is facing. Hold on, I have it here. Oh, this is the ceramic wall to the left of the altar. And here is a side aisle, and I learned many things reading Anne's description, showing columns with pulvins. Pulvins are the tiles with a little bulging shape. So I'd like you to hold the thought about the importance of the rafters as reflecting spiritual or metaphysical movements in California in the 1930s and 1920s. This also continued into the war years under Bishop Clarkson. At the same time, this saw the founding of a monastery in Trabuco Canyon, where lay participants were engaged in very similar practices as those going on at St. Francis by the Sea in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. As an American Catholic church, St. Francis is an example of a larger movement called Independent Catholics, which go under many denominations or names. Technically, Episcopalians are independent Catholics too. In fact, this church began as an Episcopal church, and at least in an adjacent structure. Independent Catholic communities number at least 250 different groups in the U.S., comprising up to 1 million adherents, according to Julie Byrne, author of a new book called The Other Catholics. So independent Catholic denominations other than the American Catholic Church were associated with St. Francis in the early years, as documents clearly show, and one was called Old Catholic. Now, Old Catholic refers to, makes a historical claim as one of the early lines of Catholicism passed down or consecrated in apostolic succession from the early bishops of the church, and before it split into the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. The Old Catholic Church, and this dates its legacy back to an archbishop named Joseph René Villatte. This is a document from 1915 in the Clarkson collection, which sort of details some of that line. Accepting the line of St. Peter, as the description goes, from earlier bishops in the apostolic succession that can be traced back to Antioch, Syria, in the 1st century of the Common Era. Well, this line of succession seems to link the founding of St. Francis to the Eastern or Orthodox Christian tradition initially, as suggested in some of these archival documents in the church, which, if you can't see them from where you sit, Orthodox Church, Christian Church year, that middle one is the star of the Antioch Church, and the third one, which has an unusual configuration, is the Oriental Catholic instruction. So it seems there was a merging of different kinds of areas of early independent Catholicism in the forming of this church. And you can imagine there's a long list of patriarchs and archbishops and bishops if you look back to the 1st century. This, and I won't go into detail because you can see how intricate it is, but this was a chart that was created by Bishop Wadley in 1950. And the colored lines, which you probably can't see from a distance, trace at least 2 of the 11 or so different lines of succession from the earliest years. I might say that it can be kind of mind-boggling to dig into some of this so-called apostolic succession. It is not so-called, but it actually is. But it is kind of a make-or-break business when it comes to one bishop succeeding another at St. Francis by the Sea. Bishop Deveau is nodding his head. Also, there are terms such as archbishop and primate, which I can get very lost in, so I'll just use the word bishop to refer to those individuals we know of. And here's a document from 1965, and then I'll be through with some of these validating documents for a while. But this shows the succession from Lowell Paul Wadley through 3 other bishops, not all of whom actually, I don't believe actually served as active bishops here, but they were part of this line of succession, to Ivan Benner, who was one of the earlier bishops, and Eugene Talarczyk, who was the last bishop before the current bishop. So now we're moving into some of the more fun stuff, and those are the actual history of the building. So this was the first St. Francis by the Sea. It was built in let me backtrack a little bit on this. Let me go back one moment for one more comment about succession, because I want to get it where it makes sense, actually. Brian Delvaux was consecrated through another line of apostolic succession. This line was passed down from Bishop Carlos Duarte Costa, a Roman Catholic bishop from Brazil, who in 1945 broke with the Roman Catholic Church. According to a Time magazine article, Costa championed the abolition of celibacy and called for a national church independent of Rome, in which priests would be permitted to be married and in which divorce would be tolerated, which is a signature of independent Catholicism. So, back to the physical church. The original St. Francis by the Sea was an Episcopal church founded by Bishop Clarkson on land he obtained in Laguna in the early 1920s. This photograph is from 1924, and the design of the church reflects churches typical of Clarkson's birthplace in England. I'll comment later on the little structure down below, which is called a lich gate, and still exists in the current church. So during the time this church was active in the 1920s, Clarkson was very active in the Laguna community. Here he is, October 9th, 1926, with actors Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford at a ribbon cutting for the opening of Pacific Coast Highway. And this is a little bit it looks like reflections because this is hanging, and I shot it through the glass at the Hotel Laguna. He is, let me do my little, I actually have a little pen here. I will. Oop. Maybe not. This is Bishop Clarkson. This is Douglas Fairbanks. And this is Mary Pickford. So here's the lich gate from that first picture today. And there are steps in between, of course, because in 1920 things began to change. Newspaper accounts reported that Bishop Clarkson had separated from the Episcopal Church. A reason given in the article was that he had a pending divorce, and although Episcopal bishops could marry, divorce was still a scandal. It turned out that he didn't get a divorce, but that he went on to say in another article that he didn't want to be part of a religion that worships a punishing God. So now it's around 1928, and the church is changing hands. A church is incorporated, by the way, in such a way that the current bishop is not really personally the owner. The property can't simply be sold and handed down to heirs. So a settlement was reached, and a group bought the prior St. Francis Episcopal Church, renamed it St. Mary's. It has been rebuilt and retains that name today, of course. And Clarkson retained the name St. Francis by the Sea, retained one or two parcels, and built a church fronting on Park Avenue. Now, this little lich gate, which still exists today, although it's interesting in the earlier church, because the rafters have wonderful messages and symbols painted on them. The original version of this actually had lettering on all over the front of it. And I actually tried to have my Photoshop do an enlargement to see what those words said, and we couldn't quite pull out the meaning. But if you do look at the early photographs, you can see that the messages were carried out on the exterior of the church as well. So the church has changed hands, and incidentally, one of the features of the lich gate traditionally was it was a place for pallbearers to await the bringing in of the casket, and also a place usually for children to wait when the bride and groom come out for scattering, say, rose petals or perhaps rice on the newlyweds. Well, this wasn't a simple switch from Episcopal to American Catholic for Bishop Clarkson. He returned to a seminary and was ordained as a bishop in the liberal Catholic Church of Antioch. Though other records, such as documents I have found in some of the files at the church as well, show that he was also consecrated in the Old Catholic Church. So it wasn't unusual for bishops to be consecrated through several lines of succession. And in the same article in the newspaper in Laguna, it listed that he was consecrated in both the liberal Catholic Church and the Old Catholic Church, but now it was becoming an American Catholic Church, the new structure. So you read this and you kind of wonder how it goes through the paces, but I guess at the time the readers thought this was not unusual. Well, the founders of the liberal Catholic Church brought a whole different component into the picture. The two founders, one of them was the heir to the Wedgwood China fortune, and they were very involved in a metaphysical movement called Theosophy, which was based on spiritual practices and a theory of the cosmos adapted largely from ancient Hindu texts. And some of these quotations are found on the rafters as well, as I'll show in a moment. But one of the Society's guiding principles, thank you. One of the Society's guiding principles was investigation of unexplained facets of nature, and that would include the psyche. So I'd like to read a few excerpts from the rafters, just to give you an idea. It's impossible to show them all. But rafter number 4 spoke about a mightier race than ever known before. And rafter number 5 invokes the idea of visualizing anew. Rafter number 7, there is no religion higher than truth. No one religion contains all of the truth. be a seeker, and serve and open the middle eye. So you can see how some of these suggest some of the practices that would be typical of a theosophical approach. So one of the rafters, the idea of the Church of the New Age, sounds like it was something that we might have thought about in the 60s. But remember that this goes back to 1934, when Bishop Clarkson conceived of these ideas, these messages and symbols, but actually hired an artist to do the painting of the words on the rafters. And one of the distinctive rafters has Osiris, Buddha, Moses, Joseph, Elohim. So it really emphasizes that the tradition of both the Theosophical Society, the Liberal Catholic Church, and American Catholics today, for the most part, are open to what are known as many altars, or different paths to seek God. So Clarkson's new position as bishop involved these two traditions, and meanwhile in Long Beach, another cleric was about to play a role in the church. And this was Lowell Paul Wadley, a resident of Long Beach, who was at the point of changing from bishop of a little chapel of All Souls. And a Long Beach Press Telegram article in 1931 said Wadley was recently consecrated in the Antioch Succession of the Holy Catholic Church. And other documents show that he became an auxiliary bishop under Bishop Clarkson in 1931, which was before the new church was actually constructed. So now the stage is set for a natural disaster and a new church to rise from the rubble of the 1933 Long Beach earthquake. A 6.3 magnitude quake that rocked the city, killed 115 people, and left behind many collapsed buildings, including my family's home. And this was after the roof was propped up, before it was reconstructed. This was the home behind which, in the garage, I found the boxes with the photographs of hands and the box with the church artifacts. So out of the rubble, and I imagine with Bishop Wadley living in Long Beach, he might have had a hand in bringing through some of the construction materials. This made an opportunity for bringing some of this earthquake rubble to Laguna and building this new church. They brought bricks, they brought ceramic tiles. The colorful tiles are used throughout the church, and a few items made of metal, such as a decorative iron gate, which is said to be from a damaged hotel cocktail lounge. But I question this story because you see on the day of the quake, March 10, 1933, Prohibition was still in effect, and it had been since 1920. So the big gates for the cocktail lounge been there for all those years? Or were they just installed, anticipating that a year from that date, roughly a year, the 21st Amendment would repeal Prohibition? So I don't think it was a cocktail lounge. I think we can call them a hotel lobby and kind of let it go at that. So now this nominally American Catholic Church that's absorbed these other traditions, St. Francis by the Sea, is open. And around that same time, Bishop Clarkson had been attending the lectures of a prolific author and lecturer, and I'm going to skip ahead. You can see the gates, barely. Let me do my little pen trick here. This is one of the early photographs. And the gates, there's one here, because they're open actually. I don't know if they were ever closed. It seems like and there's the other side. So Bishop Clarkson, like many people, was very interested in the work of Manly Palmer Hall, who had quite a following in Los Angeles. A prolific writer, he wrote hundreds of books. He wrote about the myths and ancient religions, making that kind of connection between one and another. The idea of all faiths point to one kind of truth, which was, again, one of the principles of the Theosophical Society as well. So Hall founded the Philosophical Research Society, which continues to operate today, and his name appears on rafter number 5. From an esoteric standpoint, though, participating in the Christian Eucharist or communion is thought by some to open the doors, the deeper doors of consciousness, affording a way to a mystical initiation. Here's a pamphlet from the church files, the files in the choir loft, expressing that view, the mysticism of the Mass, written by one of the bishops of the liberal Catholic Church in the 1930s. So this partly explains why the announcement of the opening of St. Francis by the Sea stated that in addition to Sunday services, there would be classes in comparative religion and astrology. And here is an astrology tile that you can see today on the floor of the church from the original structure. And of course, a lot of Catholic cathedrals in Europe include astrological symbolism, and you can still see them today in some of the major churches, including in Chartres in France. Now, crosses associated with this church also tell a story. Most visible is the cross embedded on the facade in the stucco at the front of the church. This is the Chi-Rho, one of the earliest forms of Christogram. It's formed by superimposing the first 2 letters of the Greek alphabet to produce the monogram. Legend connects this symbol to a vision by Emperor Constantine, who is credited with converting the Roman Empire to Christianity. And as the first bishop of St. Francis, Percy Wise Clarkson took Constantine as part of his name. So back to different designs of the crucifix. Another example, it was in the first the slide I showed, is the cross of the Orthodox Church. The Antioch Cross, which I don't think you're close enough to see. I don't want to take the time to dig it out. But it can be seen around on the chains of most of the priests there. Incidentally, the one second from the left is my father, Howard Thrasher. And the original cross on the lich gate was also of a different configuration. It really more closely represented that Eastern Orthodox cross, which has a kind of a floral bulb on the end of So there, in the church, there were also several kinds of insignia, like coats of arms, appearing on documents that I found as well in the archives. And until recently, these hung in the church, apparently, with portraits of previous bishops, as I understand it. Now, I understand that these were deteriorating and are now in storage. So these are some of the artifacts that I think it would be very interesting to find a home for. Among the themes on the rafters, let me go back, I think I'm ahead of myself here, is the recurrent number 7. There are 7 rafters, 7 lamps, 7 colors, 7 secret centers of the body. All these ideas are expressed on the rafters. And on rafter number 5, there are some evocations of yogic practice, where one is advised to meditate upon the chakras. And this was not taken lightly. Carolyn Getz has shared with me that as a young woman, when she lived with her parents in a home just a few steps away from Bishop Wadley, she recalls one day that she wanted to introduce her fiancé, now her husband, Gordon, to the bishop and his wife. So she walked over with Gordon, and they walked in, door was unlocked, unannounced, and there was the bishop and his wife standing on their heads in a yoga asana. And I like that story. So psychospiritual disciplines are not unfamiliar in the Catholic Church. Certainly, the idea of the imitation of Christ, the title of a contemplative work by Thomas à Kempis, is a template for prayerful meditation dating back centuries. It's intended largely for someone in a cloistered life, set apart from the daily hubbub, rather than a priest with the concerns of the parish. I think I get the impression that the current bishop of St. Francis places an emphasis on the community. Some of his changes seem aimed for making greater access for people possible. In the religious life, this seems complementary to contemplative spiritual practices. So one hopes that the new and the old, and the mystical and the pastoral, can coexist for the sake of this unique structure and its unique history. I'd like to make another Orange County connection. I also write about this in my book. In terms of spiritual practices at St. Francis in the early years, a parallel can be seen between the church in Laguna and a monastery a few miles away at the top of Trabuco Canyon. It was called Trabuco College, though some called it a monastery, and it functioned in many ways as one. It is still located there, though now it's under the wing of the Vedanta Society. It was built in the early days of World War II by Aldous Huxley's friend Gerald Hurd. He was the first BBC science commentator, and one of his popular books in the 20s was on the evolution of consciousness, a concept similar to the phrases on Rafter 2 above the front altar gates, where the terms you see on the rafters include divine mind, reincarnation. Those share the words with scientific research, share the space with scientific research. So Aldous and Gerald Hurd had friends in Laguna, among them the then resident author Christopher Isherwood. And one of the anecdotes recorded in the Historical Society here recounts how a civil defense worker happened to visit a home where he found the visitors to be Gerald Hurd and Aldous Huxley. And that civil defense person must have been surprised to find these two famous authors in this house casually chatting. And the encounter made enough of an impression to be recorded in the Historical Society's anecdotes. So I noted that, and here are some of the other elements of this sort of, in a way, strangely parallel community in Trabuco Canyon, where many of the same sensibilities prevailed at the time. So I noted the religious backgrounds of the Bishop of St. Francis have varied. Clarkson was formerly Episcopalian. Bishop Wadley was from an independent Catholic church. Bishop Talarczyk and his successor, the current bishop, are former Roman Catholic priests. I think this helps us understand what some have perceived as the rather conservative trend at St. Francis. Bishop Talarczyk became bishop at the church 6 years after the Second Vatican Council, or what is known informally as Vatican II. The council sought to somewhat modernize the church by conducting Mass in the vernacular instead of Latin, by de-emphasizing regalia or vestments, the elaborate vestments, and celebrating Mass with the officiant facing the congregation, and to include modern aesthetic changes in contemporary music and artwork. So as I understand it, Bishop Talarczyk, who became bishop in 1971, did not adopt some of the more modern practices, but some of them are being taken up by the current bishop decades later. So Bishop Delvaux has not only taken the approach of facing worshipers for the Mass, he adapted the old pulpit as a base to do so, as I understand it. He's trying to simplify the interior somewhat, causing worry among some preservationists. For example, the traditional 7 Stations of the Cross, which are small reliefs placed on the walls, local historians no doubt hope that the originals will be retained, joining the stained glass windows and the rafters as a whole, and creating that awe-inspiring interior that worshipers and visitors so appreciate. I see him nodding. Glad to see that. Then there are the angels. This, by the way, is Aldous Huxley. Then there are the angels. Angels of old in statuary were once on both sides of the altar. I think it's hard to see it on the top left. And the color is not very accurate because this is old color film, but these were angels facing toward the altar. Today, there are contemporary representations of angels, digitally created by photographer Carrie Swank. But Bishop Delvaux has told me that the photographs can be temporarily removed if a bride and groom prefer that they not be displayed during a wedding ceremony. And incidentally, this church is open to same-gender wedding and also same-gender couple baptism. So speaking of weddings, the first newspaper article about this church in the 1930s said that one of the goals of St. Francis would be to conduct weddings for divorced couples. And here's a sample of weddings over the years. One is a happy couple from the 1940s, up there in the upper left, standing by the lich gate. No doubt they've been showered in rose petals. One is an article about a celebrity wedding when actress Bette Davis's ex-husband was married to her former babysitter in a service officiated by Bishop Wadley in 1950. And here is Bishop Wadley conducting the service of his granddaughter Carolyn and her groom. But in another location, I think it was probably too large a crowd for the little chapel. And last but not least, there's a hint of the original concept of many altars or seeking understanding of different faiths. Can be seen in a wedding that took place just a few months ago in the lower right. Bishop Delvaux officiated in one service, and the parallel service was conducted by a priest of the Hindu faith, both at the Hyatt Regency Resort. And this nuptial related an announcement in the Sunday New York Times. So, I was just going to add that certainly from the outset and even today, contributions from weddings are one of the sources of funds for this church. And because repairs are needed, a broken organ that cannot be repaired but must be hauled away, a back wall deteriorating and in need of reconstruction. Previously, there was an earthquake retrofit done under Bishop Talarczyk's time, but maintenance of an old building is endless, which I can testify to because I'm the fourth generation owner of my 110-year-old house in Long Beach. Some of the artifacts that were once inside the church are in storage, and clearly space is needed, such as the choir loft where old files take up a lot of room. I'm told that the church once had a wonderful organ and a renowned organist named Richard Norris. Jessica has phonograph records of Norris playing the organ. Are they on DVD or old, like 33s? Old vinyl. But that was during Bishop Talarczyk's era, when Jessica says the acoustics in the church were unbelievable in the choir. So here are a few other flashbacks showing the church in its heyday, hats and all. Today, in the spirit of progress, of course, dress codes are relaxed. And one sees at a Sunday service people dressed respectfully but casually. I've noticed at a couple of the services I attended in the last year. Another side of flashbacks is that over the years there have been conflicts and debilitating illness leading to near dissolution of the church. The transition from Bishop Talarczyk to a successor was rather fraught because he'd been ill, and as a consequence the church was closed for a while. And what happened next was unclear. The legalities of the church meant that a successor was needed. There had been a reported falling out between the bishop and his heir apparent, Father Paul Rabel, who was on the right, and the other photograph shows the current bishop, Delvaux, with Bishop Talarczyk. So because of a misunderstanding or a rift, Rabel would not become Bishop of St. Francis, but he would accompany then Father Brian Delvaux to Rio, Brazil, for the consecration through that line of succession. And Bishop Delvaux would establish an independent American Catholic Church of the Good Shepherd in Lakewood. Meanwhile, in Laguna Beach, so I guess I would say that we don't know what the future will bring or whether Bishop Delvaux has a plan for succession. He brings his own stamp to this era of leadership, including his sense of humor, less apparent perhaps with his predecessors in a more formal time. And maybe this humor is a hint about his expressed interest in a more contemporary and pastoral approach. I'd like to recount a story of one such humorous incident. It was this past Easter. The church was packed with 85 people, spilling upward into the choir loft. In the modern approach to Catholic Church, as of Vatican II, of course, one of the several changes was an encouragement to de-emphasize ornate regalia. Well, on this holy Easter day, Bishop Delvaux decided to wear the full regalia, kind of just, I guess, for fun. Old school for this one occasion. And the traditional bishop's hat, or mitre, has little side flaps. And they were bugging him. So at one point, he flipped them up with his hands and said in exasperated good humor to all assembled, "I feel like Miss Piggy." And everyone cracked up, adding a light touch on a beautiful day with sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. So I'd like to add a note about healing, which was an important component in this church from the outset. There's a reference on one of the rafters to spiritual healing. It's on rafter number 2 over the altar. In the 1950s, this was part of the spiritual exercises the priests and some of the lay followers learned and practiced. Today, there's a Wednesday healing service conducted by Father Jack Kearney. And Father Kearney has installed a sick call museum in the choir loft. The small museum displays sets used in anointing of the sick, or last rites, one of the traditional 7 sacraments. In former times, when people died at home instead of in hospitals, a priest would be called to come to the home and give extreme unction. A sick call set included a crucifix, candles, holy water, and oil. These sets were kept at home to be prepared for that eventuality. Now, apart from the innovation of the Sick Call Museum, I'd like to talk about a few other changes at St. Francis, not to everyone's liking, but maybe I can see both sides. Take the gates. They've been removed for now. Bishop Delvaux wanted more room near the sanctuary for people to stand below the altar. The attendance at the church has risen. He's been promoting it in hotels in town, and tours of St. Francis were very popular under the auspices of Lorraine Jones and her Flavor of Laguna tours. And Jessica DiStefano has led tours in the past also. Mention of a sick call museum and the last rites. Well, let me move by one other picture of contemporary St. Francis by the Sea and Bishop Delvaux with a couple of his parishioners. So mention of the Sick Call Museum and last rites brings to mind another proposed change. Few know that on one wall of the sanctuary is a small opening covered by burgundy cloth. It is a casket door that long ago allowed a casket to be brought through. This has not happened for decades. And for decades, that section of wall has been covered outside by this bush. And the opening isn't very visible to anyone in the church, unless they're standing right next to it. Bishop Delvaux has said he hopes to initiate an update so there is a regular door instead of a casket door. The bush would be removed. The door, he believes, would make the church safer for all inside, especially in case of fire or earthquake. I'd like to reverse chronology for a moment and add a few more words about the arcano-esoteric side of St. Francis by the Sea. There are seemingly countless symbols on the rafters, and I did not have time to look into them, but hope to. The triptych on the back wall suggests the visionary art of mystic William Blake, and at the side is a symbol that you can hardly see here, but it's a long red column, and it is a symbol sometimes associated with theosophy and also associated with some of the studies in terms of yoga. I've been told that despite Bishop Talarczyk being rather uncomfortable with esoteric themes, he nonetheless supported the protection of the church on the National Register of Historic Places. I do understand that he modified the liturgy as it was handed down from Bishops Clarkson and Wadley. Now that I brought up the present time, I'd like to repeat a call to action. What to do with the treasure chest of church in terms of documents and photographs and some of its artifacts, the ones that are not being used in an active sense today. The physical church, we certainly hope, will survive as nearly intact as possible in the spirit of the National Register of Historic Places. So here's my vision of what might be possible, if I may be so bold. In terms of photographs and documents and artifacts, perhaps an accessible digital archive online, perhaps with a grant to produce some of this work, perhaps in conjunction with UCI, but hopefully an archive somehow, somewhere. So yes, there have been changes in the church over the years. There were periods when the church had an organist and choir boys, altar boys, and there was an affiliation in 1936 with a group of nuns. Julie Byrne, the author of The Other Catholics, notes that over time, independent Catholic groups tend to split, and often branches reach dead ends. For example, when Father Paul Rabel, Bishop Talark's apparent successor, when that likely succession did not come through, I'm told he was also a choir director, by the way, and Father Rabel had a stained glass studio. And during his time at St. Francis, he designed and installed several replacement windows, perhaps because the originals had been damaged by the earthquake, or because some of the side windows apparently were previously of clear glass. If you look up to the upper left, it's one of the early photographs from the 1950s, and the one to its right, a little hard to see, actually has the ones on the left and the clerestory level are clear glass, and on the right actually have a stained glass working. So change is a fact for better or for worse. One can't help but weigh Bishop Delvau's practical ideas: repair a wall, remove an unfixable pipe organ, add a door, make the choir more people-friendly by figuring out what to do with the old filing cabinets. There are problems to be solved, and some of us would like to help. And the bottom line from a historical stance, really, is preserving the beautiful building and its amazing artistic rafters. I think I speak for many when I say that I hope and believe that as Bishop Delvaux creates a living space for souls, that he'll keep the unique appearance of this church intact as much as possible for future generations. Thank you. One last amusing photograph. I believe that this little boy was the altar boy, and the little girl on the left is Carolyn, the granddaughter of Bishop Wadley, and I'm the little girl on the far right. Back in our days when we would come to this church every Sunday. Thank you very much. And I'd be happy to take questions, and there are people here who can probably answer the questions better than I can.
Hello, testing.
I see a question in the back.
I have a question. I don't need a microphone.
If you can hold on just a moment here. Oh, we got it.
Here comes a microphone.
We're taping it, Leah.
It's being taped. We have to hear you.
We're taping it.
Oh, all right. Thank you. It's very interesting. When you showed the first 3 crucifixes in the very beginning of the slideshow, one of the crucifixes you said was Oriental, I believe, but it said Orthodox.
Yes. Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox is, here we go. Eastern Orthodox is one of the legacies that in a way filters down to the American Catholic Church through the independent Catholic Apostolic Succession. The chart I showed you that had the little lines coming down, the head of the lines are actual geographic locations in the Near East for the most part, because again, this is the cradle of Christianity. So before the Great Schism of the year 1042 or whatever, when Eastern Orthodoxy broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, they took separate courses. Some of the symbols went respectively with the different churches, and the cross of the Antioch succession has a different design, say, than a standard Roman cross. Perhaps the bishop can express that differently, but there were several crosses in the documents in the old church files dating back to the old Catholic era when they had drawn on the existing artwork.
If you were to
Hold on.
If you were to go to
Hold
an
on.
Eastern Orthodox church, that the key word is east, there were 5 C's of Christianity. Of course, there was Jerusalem and Antioch, Alexandria. Among them, of course, besides Constantinople, was Rome. And the West evolved its own style of liturgy, liturgical art. For example, in the East, you wouldn't see a lot of statues. You'd see icons with very stylistic representations of Christ and Mary and the saints. Where in the West, you saw more of the kind of church, let's say, if you go into our church right now, you would see the statues. You wouldn't see just icons, flat icons. So the East, if you went to an Eastern Roman Catholic church, which, by the way, permits married clergy, the Byzantine Rite, it would be almost identical to that Orthodox art, where the split in 1054 didn't change the practices all that significantly for the East. And then there was the West, and that was the See of Rome began to kind of take on more power and more power and more power. And that's why part of the Eastern Rite of the Church split and became the Orthodox Church, because they figured Rome was getting pretty too big for their britches, basically.
Russia or the Eastern Orthodox?
Yes, Russian Orthodox is one of the, there's Serbian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Orthodox would just be indicative of the Eastern Church that pulled away from the papacy. So it's an independent Catholic Church in a way.
Do the Egyptian Copts fit in under Orthodox?
There's a Coptic Pope.
Could you repeat
So
the
there's
question?
an independent,
I
yeah.
was wondering about the Egyptian Coptic Church.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is, in the photograph you couldn't see very well, this is the cross,
Eastern?
the Antioch Cross.
Yeah.
See, it's very different from this is very different from what you would expect to see in most Christian churches that we're familiar with.
So I want to make known that the angels, I call them Victoria's angels. They're very modern and everything, are the work of an artist, a photographic artist, and she will use the church more or less to kind of display her art. She wants to, anybody who likes it can buy it, but it's really not part of what we would call the decor of the church. In other words, they come down on numerous occasions, when it doesn't seem to fit the occasion. But it isn't like they're there, but once in a while we'll take them down. That may be what's happening, but they're not considered part of the art of the church. Actually, my sin was to make the walls white and clean.
That's your sin?
Yeah, that's it. But the gates, by the way, we need to do something about the gates. The problem with the gates was not only that they got in the way because we were beginning to kind of gather people around the altar for the Eucharist. And it was kind of, I try to take away the idea you have to walk sideways to walk around in the place because we want to de-emphasize that it's so tiny that we're kind of crowded in there. And then, but they really came down at an ordination of one of the priests in the independent Catholic Church where they really couldn't accommodate priests coming up and walking by and laying hands on the individual. So I've had some ideas about the gates, and as far as any input or absolutely anybody who would like to be part of the care of the building and the preservation of the building would be totally welcome.
Is it being used right now?
You want to get that back to her? There's people watching.
Yeah, the question is it being used now? We have, right now, when we first came on board, we had about 5 people on a Sunday. Now, what do we have? We've had 55 the Sunday before. It's almost as though it would be wise for us, especially during the vacation season, to have 2 services. There are websites around town that are putting things like, it's number 7 on the 9 coolest things to do when you come to Laguna Beach. We didn't have anything to do with it, but it just happened to get, people come in and they come on vacation. Now some of them come annually. You know, they make a point of coming to Mass there because it's informal, it's a contemporary Mass. It's like it's the same Mass as you would pretty much experience in a Roman Catholic church, but without I'd say it certainly isn't stuffy. What would you say?
It's modern.
You call it modern?
Yeah.
I call it more old-fashioned, back to what it was originally, before ages and ages of different traditions, put together a Mass that was almost impossible with crosses and this and that because the Benedictines did this and the Dominicans did this and the French did this and that's what came out of Trent. So what the Vatican Council did was to try to go back over all of that and simplify the liturgy a bit. So that's my position. I don't look at myself as being very modern at all.
Well, the funny thing, when I was
Participatory.
rooting around in we were rooting around in the files, and during that time, a couple of people came. They'd be knocking on the door down below because you have to go up this little outside stair to go up in the choir loft where the file cabinets are. And I was amazed. This was like a weekday, in the afternoon, and people one couple was from England. They'd heard about this church, and they wanted to go in. So
Film crew came from Japan one time, and they wanted to, ask questions about the church. I wish I could get a hold of that because I'm sure they probably dubbed in Japanese. I wanted to see myself speak Japanese. By the way, the things that are in storage, I started going after because you mentioned it to me, and I was looking around all over. Father Jack, he's got them.
Well, I'd like to take photographs
Oh,
of
yeah.
those artifacts.
Well, not
so
only
we can
that,
at least start
Here's
collecting what's
the
where.
problem. You know what's the problem with that church is? It's the smallest cathedral in the world, and I still think it is the smallest working cathedral. Who knows? I'm not sure about the other one. But there's no space. We're talking about maybe renting, and you know what rental here is, a bachelor apartment. Then we could have kind of an office where we could meet with couples who want to be married and have kind of move on. I would like to do a bereavement group. We have certain things that we are capable of doing in terms of helping the community. So my big thing is pastoral, and the notion that is also part of independent Catholicism. Besides, you can be married if you're a priest and a bishop, and divorced and remarried people you can figure out divorce is punishment enough. So
We have one more question over
but
here.
the other thing is that we believe that we want to provide a more, let's say, hospitable kind of an environment where people can feel comfortable, and that's basically it. Everybody who has an independent church says we want to catch the Catholics that fell through the cracks.
I think we have another question over there.
Yes, I might be one of the contributing factors why people are coming and checking your church out. As a matter of fact, I brought a group in. I work for a company here in town. We do what's called the back roads of Laguna, do all the places, the Pine Castle and so forth, and I always make sure that we do it on bikes, bring people down there. And this question always gets asked, if this is the second smallest, what's the first? And I was just brought out this evening, it's in someplace in Missouri.
Missouri.
Do you have a name for that? And so I could research it a little bit?
You could Google it up, I'm pretty sure. I think that's how I pinned it down. I don't have it with me, but I think you could just, does Nora have it?
Hold on.
You'll know in a minute.
I still have the book at home from, I believe it was the 1980s. I can pull it out to give you the exact date. And it tells the last year when St. Francis was in there, and then it was the year following. But Guinness Book of World Records for sure.
But you can Google up the locale.
Have you heard anything about Croatia, that they have a smaller cathedral?
I haven't. But that, if it's
Some
if it's
people tell me
announced
it's.
itself and stuff, it too will be something you can Google.
There's a lot of urban legend.
Another question here.
I attend the church frequently, and there are three interesting things that may be historical. I used to ride my bike from North Laguna to the church on Sunday, but you had to be very careful because when I was 17 or 18 years old, you had to wear a tie and a nice shirt, and your hair had to be combed, and as my hair kept getting longer, the parishioners would kind of look. But I remember one thing that was, as a kid, that really stuck with me that we don't have now, and that's that the clergy would be swinging these heavy incense things.
Yes.
And the church would just be, you could barely see the fog in it.
My mother once had to take me out of the church as a little kid because I was getting green.
So they don't, for the non-smokers, they don't do that anymore.
No. It was
No-
very dramatic, though.
Number two is when the church was closed for a period of time recently, a couple of years ago. I'll never forget, and our bishop today speaks of the weddings and everything. Some man drove by up in a real expensive car, and he was breathless and all dressed up. Where's the bishop? Where's the bishop? I said, well, he hasn't been here for a couple weeks. Well, what do you mean? I've paid for my wedding, and it's in a day and a half. I've driven nonstop from Las Vegas to get to Laguna Beach. Where is the bishop? I said, well, here's the phone number. So there were dry periods, as the newspapers have reported. And then the fun last thing is we always have the War of the Donuts. And Bishop always brings the best donuts, and the apple fritters are buried at the bottom after the service. But he always says, well, these donuts came from Longbeach, which is where he brings them from Long Beach. And of course, we call this Right Beach, which is Laguna.
But you better be careful. There's a lot of Long Beach people. Every brick came from Long Beach. I'm finding so much about Long Beach. And the woman who was probably, I don't know if she was the superior of that group of nuns, her daughter called me up, living in Long Beach, and the family home was being, sold. And she had some pictures, which I'll get to you, of those sisters.
Well, it was announced in this
And her
article.
father was a priest here, too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
It was announced in 1936 in the Press Telegram that this was apparently one of Bishop Wadley's goals was to bring together several different communities of the American Catholic Church and the Old Catholic Church and the Liberal Catholic Church. So he was looking for a kind of unification, and that included this affiliation with the nuns. But, however, some of the independent Catholic churches today do ordain women ministers. It's a wide variety of organizations. Some do, some don't. They're different in terms of their being socially progressive or not. Some of the independent Catholics are much more conservative even than the Roman Catholic Church. Mel Gibson's church in Malibu you may have heard about.
Yeah.
It's very regressive. I mean, it's in Latin. It's
Right.
the priest
And that
faces
was,
away
that
from
was
the congregation. So independent Catholic can be anything. it wants to
Remember in the
be.
80s, Bishop Lefebvre, he was very, very ultra-conservative. That's Mel Gibson's church.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not his church,
Oh,
but
yes.
he does attract some.
So they're not all socially liberal or in any other respect
no.
progressive.
No. But about unity, I can't tell you how many people try to unify something so independent. Independent is the key word. Each little group, it's called autocephalic. It almost sounds nasty. Autocephalic means each one of these churches, it comes up to that head and that's it. It doesn't go very far beyond. So, I'm really not a papist. I was a Roman Catholic priest. And I think that if the current Pope was aware of exactly what was going on in this little cathedral, he'd have no problem with it. He wouldn't approve of it or say openly, but he'd say, well, you're a big person, who am I to judge? That just seems to be his attitude. So, I just think it's an earlier, more hospitable Christian kind of a community. But it's also, I very much understand, it's been here since about 10 years. I was born here. So, and that was 1948. So It was kind of it was a young church back then. So I understand that it has value, and I applaud and welcome anyone who would like to really kind of roll up their sleeves and organize things. But, I mean, I opened the church. Where are we going to put that stuff? It's the smallest, the second smallest cathedral in the world. We need to find something even beyond that building where we can save some of this stuff.
We have one more question here.
Hello. Yeah. So one of the things that struck me about these rafters is a couple of things. One is wisdom, and the other one is Aquarians, and it's centered on the rafters. And given that this was built in 1934, that shows a lot of vision, because the age of Aquarius in astrology is related to the age of civilization, and actually some of the earlier shrines before there is written history are they're awash with fish bones, which is also the same theme as water. Is a Pisces and Aquarius and the transition. And this actually predates history. So I was wondering if you had anything to say about these mythical, nearly themes that seem to be central to the
Well,
rafters.
there's so many, and again, there are a huge number of just images, symbolic images throughout the church, throughout the rafters. Astrology, of course, goes back to, in all cultures and all civilizations, to ancient times. And that was one of the teachings when this church was first established. The Sunday service was followed by courses in astrology. So this just picks up where many different faiths have followed, and looking at the cosmos in different ways, trying to understand reality and
Consciousness.
And I could put...
And it also goes into the areas of myth and just ancient rites. So, but the Age of Aquarius is something that was picked up obviously in popular culture, but the Aquarian symbol as one of the signs of the zodiac certainly goes back to the earliest recorded times.
Now, I don't know if this is urban legend or not, but somebody told me, so anybody who, we have scholars here, indicate that somewhere in the Vatican there is a tile with the sign of the zodiac on it.
Well, I'm not surprised because there are so many cathedrals in Europe that have signs of the zodiac, including one, I didn't bring the name with me, but it was a very long, difficult to pronounce name in Italian in Rome that was designed by Michelangelo, who certainly the Sistine Chapel and St. Peter's. So this is, and it has apparently prominent astrological symbols in that cathedral as well. So it's been part of the church from the earliest times, certainly in medieval era, Gothic cathedrals.
But what I find amazing is the people who say, oh, what's the sign of the zodiac here? You know, they get all upset about it. Then they ask me, what are you, a Scorpio?
I'm going to be asking our speakers and guests to stay a few minutes for those who want to continue this, but I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. They say the best talks stimulate a lot of questions, so clearly this was an excellent talk. November 22nd, please join us for our next program, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do come check out the books. We have both the Book of the Rafters here from Jessica DiStefano and Aldous Huxley's Hands as well.